Nothing tickles my pickle more than a black man in a big black coat. Because inevitably, I know there's a big black cock underneath it all.
God damn it, what are you, the Guardian?
Yeah, I was actually quoting him from his book, I Love the BBC, D.A. BBC.
Yeah.
Number one hit, Nowhere. But what was a number one hit? I actually don't know if it was number one. It may have been
a hit.
It was a hit. I don't know if it's number one. But anyway, was Blade. Say what you will, the comic book explosion of adaptations really started with Blade.
Yeah, it was. It predated freaking X-Men by like a year.
Yeah,
or two,
it did, and it gave studios confidence that if this minor character in the comic book landscape could make such a big splash, then maybe these very well-known characters could do all the more. So studios like Fox and etc., they started investing in these movies, and we all know what happened. Eventually, after tons of crap, we got this comic book age we're living in terms of movies. So Blade, thank you, except for those few years where it was really bad.
And that's also your fault. So
yeah, it's also your fault, you asshole. But we do love Blade here. We've loved Blade for a long time. Again, so has Guardian because of his lust for BBC.
He hates the movie. He just likes the BBC.
He's just waiting for the moment when his wang pops out. But we are not just going to talk about Blade. We're going to talk about the Blade trilogy as we look back on it. Hit that music!
Movies, music, story times, all kinds of shit for you. Everything goes in the house and I'm
So Blade 1 pops into the theaters, seemingly out of nowhere, because as I said in our intro, who the hell is Blade, said most people.
Yeah.
Even I, an avid, as you know, I was a pretty avid comic enthusiast back in the day. Now I just hang with Archie all the time.
That's the only thing you read.
Yeah, it's sad. It's very sad.
Yep.
But yeah, back then I was really into comics, and even I knew who he was, but I wasn't aware of the intricacies of Blade. And but there he was. All of a sudden this was a thing, and the American populace responded pretty positively to it. It became a relatively large success, enough so to spur a fucking trilogy of its own, which made their own healthy amounts. So let's talk about this first one. It was directed by Stephen Norrington, a guy that really was a new up-and-comer in the industry, because he had only directed, if memory serves me right, one movie. And even if he had directed more than one, they weren't studio films. Death Machine was his first movie that I was ever aware of him. And it's a horror movie, lots of odes to the genre in it. The point, you could tell it was a horror fan making it, because his characters were named like Raimi and Carpenter and shit like that. That kind of ode. But it was a good movie, and it did a lot with its very limited budget. And it caught the attention of New Line. David Goyer, who at the time, of course, hadn't done much in terms of the genre.
That Nick Fury movie, though. It was really good.
That was great. Yes, there was a Nick Fury back in the 90s, and it was David Hasselhoff.
Who kind of looks like him.
It did look like him.
But that's about it.
So looks aren't everything, is what they say. Acting might be a thing. But anyway, David Goyer, though, he's now like a big name. He's a controversial name, which I don't get, because for the most part, he's delivered in terms of his writing.
He's kind of a butthole, but
he is a butthole. He's a large cat butthole.
Sometimes that happens.
Yeah, but this was kind of like his big watershed moment in terms of writing. And
the first step in becoming the butthole he is now.
It was kind of a Shyamalan thing.
Yeah.
Build up the butthole. Man, that's a good title.
Hashtag build up the butthole.
So yeah, man, Goyer was building up his butthole by writing this little number, and the movie really has a large influence and a foundation in blaxploitation mixed with the superhero film. This is, of the three Blade movies, the one that still retains comic bookishness in terms of the character of Blade.
I was actually kind of impressed watching it again.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, we both loved it already.
But it was one of those things, like, I've seen it maybe twice. Mm-hmm. Maybe, I'm sure we saw it more than that, but that I remember once in the theater and once at home. And in my mind, it was always the least cool. Right. I was way wrong.
Yes, you were.
It's really good. Like, I was impressed.
Yeah. And,
But yes, it does have, it has its unique feel.
Yeah, very unique. We do get a good sound feeling of the world that Blade lives in. despite the limited budget, and I mean, it was a fairly decent budget film, but they were building a world here, and we really get a good sense of the rules of it, who lives there, by what rules Blade himself lives. All that stuff is very, very well fleshed out in the movie, either through dialogue or through what we do see, little or not. So yeah, man, it works wonderfully. The action is top notch. I would say the second best action in the film, but it's pretty fucking good, especially the final confrontation.
Yeah.
At that huge, fucking temple.
Funnel thing.
Yeah, funnel temple.
Temple funnel.
Blade himself just reeks badass. This movie.
I was trying to stop myself from saying he's badass, but you gotta at least say it once.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you took it.
Yeah. We tried this video before, and that's
all
you
I
could
said.
say.
All I said was, "This is badass."
But to be fair, he is that badass.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie without Wesley Snipes wouldn't have been the same. That's not to say that the script is bad. It's just Wesley Snipes truly embodies Blade. And even though they changed a lot of the background to the character and the stories and kind of revamped them and modernized them,
he kind of did.
He is now Blade, right?
He's like, it's like a Hugh Jackman thing. You can't see anyone else as Blade.
Exactly.
I'm sure eventually it'll happen, but I'll always be like, oh, but the Snipe Meister.
Yeah, and it's gonna happen. I mean, black don't crack, but eventually it's gonna be like, dude, we can't hire you anymore. P.S.
You can't do your weird little kicks anymore.
Yeah, but yeah, man, he's just so much the embodiment of this. He became this character, I'm
not very familiar with Wesley Snipes.
To Wong Fu.
The only times I've seen him is Demolition Man and this. Really, if I really look into that.
Demolition Man is the shit.
It is cool.
In a completely different way.
But if you want to be convinced that Wesley Snipes kicks ass, this is the movie to see.
This is it. Now, it is notable that he produced the Blade movies.
Yeah,
he was
it feels like he's very passionate about it.
Yeah, and he was very, very involved in the production process, and you could tell in the way he portrays his character. He knows the character. He is the character. And I think second to him is Chris Christopherson, which was one of those, like, I mean, he'd acted before, but it was like, what the fuck? Where are you gonna get a vampire movie?
The guy that's freaking sung with Dolly Parton, wrote Sunday Morning Coming Down for Johnny Cash.
Yep.
Why?
Now he's in a vampire movie.
Yeah.
But he was really good as
really good.
Blade's mentor, Whistler, which I think was one of my favorite characters a while back. And revisiting him, I can see why. He's just one of those characters that is cool. That you want more of. In fact, at one point, I think they even pondered the idea of a Whistler standalone movie.
Yeah, that would have been... Well, it would have been cool, but at the same time, it wouldn't have been him playing him.
Yeah, it would have been a younger version. But, those are your core characters. And, of course, we have Steven Dorff as a bad guy, which, again, I liked him in the beginning, but upon revisiting it, he was great. He was really good.
He was a lot better than I remembered.
And for fans of vampire films, you get a lot of cool little things in there, the idea of the hierarchy of vampires is really established. We get to know about the Vampire Nation. There's allusions to other vampire other vampire films, and of course Udo Kier pops up because it's a vampire movie, and he's got to be in there somewhere. But yeah, man, really great cast that really, really brings across what the intent and purpose of, and as I said, that goes hand in hand with the director who brings in this comic booky flavor, but again, kind of like a neo-blaxploitation movie, keeping it urbanized, keeping that feel alive. And it does have a very drab aesthetic that really makes it pop visually, oddly enough, despite being so drab. It gives it its own unique, style.
Upon revisiting it, I think visually it's my favorite one.
I'd have to agree, and I think we both were like, Blade 2's the shit.
Yeah,
that's what it is the shit.
Yeah, it is, but revisiting part 1, I was really surprised.
Now, that's not to say everything is roses, though, because this was a fairly low-budget film, and some of the effects, even then, were pretty bad. And this is especially towards the end. Really up to the end, they're all pretty great.
Yeah.
And there's some very unique effects, like when Udo Kier's Vampire Nation head leader gets killed. It's kind of like this weird stop-motion-y melting...
Technically, you could say it's bad, but it actually works
very
well, and it looks cool.
it looks.
So we don't consider it bad.
Yeah, it looks really neat. So it's kind of like a Harryhausen thing where they look terrible, really, if you think about it,
Yeah.
but they're so cool looking
Yeah.
in their motion. You know, stop motion master Ray Harryhausen, for anyone who doesn't know. It's just that kind of flavor. That's cool looking, you know, and unique. But yeah, really up to the end, everything looks pretty good. You know, and they keep it to the basics. Lots of blood, lots of gore. That's relevant to what's going on.
Most of the effects are just vamps being dusted.
Mm-hmm. And that's really the one thing that stands out as, quote, not great looking or bad, is the vampire dusting or exploding once he stakes him or kills him in some form. I mean, this cartoony CGI skeletons really look awful, but
It's a lot better than most stuff back then.
yeah, you know, you got to consider again and it doesn't. Here's the thing: it doesn't affect the flow of the movie. It doesn't affect how cool it is. You just kind of wish, yeah, well, that would have been neat to see better, which we do get as the series goes along. They do look better, but the big confrontation at the end between the La Magra infused villain and Blade leads to this really these spirits of the elders of the vampire nation are ripping out and boy howdy they look fucking fake as shit, which is weird because like a movie like I, Frankenstein had similar effects and that came out like a few years ago.
Yeah.
So that's sad for I, Frankenstein. But it's real brief and it really does. I mean,
They do look really crappy though.
they look awful, but you get across what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
And you're so invested in the movie that it doesn't matter. Once La Magra, the blood god takes over our villain, he does get chopped in half at one point, and we see this really fake fucking CGI blood connecting him. You know, you take it with what you got because, again, as I said, the movie's so cool that you don't even give a shit.
And I think they did a good job with reshooting all that because originally it was just going to be a big cloud of blood.
Yeah, originally there was a different ending.
With a head in the middle.
And we all know that cloud villains are all the rage right now. So,
it even established that. Yeah.
It was ahead of that. But, yeah, man, really cool. Another thing that a lot of people remember about the Blade movies are the soundtracks. You know, each kind of stands out on its own. I think this was the most subdued one of the three. But it does give it an urban flavor. And at the same time, it has... The through line for all three soundtracks was that they had urban mixed with kind of like a dance, you know, like a techno dancing flavor to it. And this established that. Oddly enough, I think the soundtrack for the third movie is my favorite. And I don't really know why. It is the one I listen to the most, and I had all these three soundtracks. But, yeah, I mean, I like them all. I liked it in this, too.
I think, well, we'll get to that one, but let me say... about that you just said, I think the third one is the best to listen to in CD form because it has some really cool songs.
Yeah.
But they're in it in the movie so very little, and I was like, oh man, because I got used to listening to the CD, and I was like, oh. Yeah,
you could really get snippets of it. But here it's more less vocally driven music and more, you know, ambiance heavy music of those genres. And really cool. Any last thoughts or anything you just want to say in general about Blade? One.
Man, I gotta say, upon revisiting it, I don't know if I'm dumb in saying this. I think it's my favorite one. I was really surprised by it. I remembered it being great. I was blown away. And it impressed me more than the others upon revisiting.
Yeah, it is pretty fantastic. Again, each of these stands out on their own as different. It's kind of odd because as much as it's brought back for each one has a different style.
Yeah, they do.
And delivery, you know, which is really kind of cool if you think about it because it gives you a different taste each time of the character. But I gotta say, considering... And again, we used to love Blade 2 the most, and that's not to say that Blade 2 sucks. In fact, it kicks ass. We'll talk about that right now. But yeah, I think upon revisiting, you know, and I loved part 1 when it came out. I wore that VHS dry. I don't know how you wear it with something dry, but
as a whole, it just is the most well put together. I think.
I think I realized why I wore that baby out because It's great.
BBC's.
It's a fun ass movie, and of course we have a fondness for blaxploitation and horror and all that stuff, so that helps too. But we move on to part 2, which was made a few years later, to great acclaim. This will, whereas part 1, of course, was a new thing. There was still some detractors and the budget. And all. This, after the big hit that part 1 was, inevitably they dumped more money on the project and got somebody at the time up and coming director, Guillermo del Toro, in what had to be his second big studio film. And the first one where he wasn't trying to be killed by the Weinsteins. That would be Mimic. But anyway, Del Toro is a favorite of ours, and by now he's established his visual style and his vision as a director, which is usually to give the monsters in his movies, horrible as they may appear, a heart, a reason to be other than I'm a monster.
Yeah.
And that's usually what he does. He injects this emotion into his creatures that sometimes makes them the most relatable of the beings in his movies, which is an odd place to be. And he did that here, I believe. And I think that's the strength of Blade 2, other than it continues that feeling and flavor of Blade's badass and all that junk. It brings all that back. But I think the strength really lies in the villain. And of course, we have our villain, whose name I forgot.
Big little vamp guy.
Big little vamp guy. That's his name. Why did I forget his name?
Yeah, I don't remember either, honestly.
Valak, I want to say.
Something like that, yeah.
Oh shit. Well, anyway, our main villain is basically an archetypal Frankenstein figure. He basically made a Frankenstein movie with vampires, is what Del Toro did, and then put it in the universe of Blade. That's what he did. In terms that our villain is a rejection of his creator. He was created by the leader of the vampire nation in an attempt to evolve the nation, the vampires in general, to a new stage of superiority. And upon seeing what he had created, an abomination, a deformity, he rejected him. And like Frankenstein, he goes out in the world and then decides, fuck this, I'm going to destroy my creator, and hunts him down relentlessly. And of course, the Vampire Nation hires Blade very reluctantly, and that led to some great chemistry, or anti-chemistry, I guess, scenes with between Blade and the team of vampires, which he usually hunts, and they usually hunt him, working together to stop this threat. Only to find out at the end that really there was a lot behind the villain's motivation to find relatable. So I think for that reason, story-wise, Blade 2 is the strongest of them. And visually speaking, it's very rich. There's a lot more color in this movie. Although initially it does still carry over those drab tones, eventually a lot more color schemes are introduced into the film, which is refreshing again in its own right. Anything I got to say up to this point?
No, I would agree with you. I do have something to say about the effects, and I don't know if that's next or not.
No, we'll talk about the cast first. Again, Blade returns. It's awesome. We do kind of get I think the first retcon moment in comic book movies when Whistler, who was very clearly dead in the first one, we kind of get a retcon to his death. And they do it in a way where you kind of just are like, cool. Really, because Whistler's so cool.
Yeah, that's what I was like.
I just want more Whistler. That's fine.
All right, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but all right.
Yeah.
He's cool, so.
And they do make the effort to show what happened for him to still be alive, so kudos on that. It's not very convincing, but it works.
But he's cool.
Yeah, you want him to be there, and in the meantime, he's replaced by what's his name? Scud?
Grundle.
Yeah, Grundle. Played by the scummiest man in the universe. So that's cool.
Yeah.
And man, but really the standouts here are the vampires, that work opposite Blade, and they're all fucking great. Luke Goss as our villain, who would make a return with Hellboy 2 as the villain there, which is pretty much the same villain, by the way, I gotta say. And then of course Ronnie Perlman,
Ronnie P,
leading our group of predator-like mercenaries, vampire mercenaries. That was all cool, man. Really cool characters, all unique in their own. Characters that, like in Predator, with the characters there, even though they don't get a lot of screen
They don't
time,
really do much at all.
yeah,
but they're cool.
Yeah, you want to spend more time with them. You know, that's what a lot of people don't realize about Predator. As cool as it is,
They don't do shit.
the characters really don't do much.
They die.
They die, and they have cool lines, and that's what these characters do. They're just those characters you want to see more of, and inherently you just like.
Yeah.
So which is really, really cool. And so everybody is great across the board. I think. Is there somebody that you didn't like in?
No, but I did like
You diddled
the dynamic between Ronnie P and Blade.
Yeah.
Mainly because everything Ronnie P says is basically just being there for Blade to later own him.
Yeah. Which is cool.
In great win in super cool ways.
Yeah, it is pretty awesome. So all the chemistry, all the characters are excellent in this. The effects in this are a step up. The dusting effects now look a lot more convincing and really cool. Possibly the best of the series. Because in context with how rich the visual environment, I mean the sets and environments look, you know, color and all that stuff, the dusting really, really looks like a part of that world versus, oh, look at that cartoon skeleton.
I kind of like the cartoon skeleton.
And through and through, the effects, I was afraid of having to revisit the Reapers, which their
that actually looks
jaws
really good, yeah.
open up, and it's of course a CGI effect, and it looked really good. It still looks good. The effects hold up.
The thing I liked the most was, and they do it a lot, is that they transition between a CG stunt and a freaking Wesley Snipes stunt.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, he has like 10,000 superhero landings in this.
Yeah.
But it's you can tell, you can see the transition, but it doesn't make you go, oh, that looks shitty. That actually makes you go, oh wow, they did that really well.
Yeah, that really surprised me how well those transitions.
Like you can tell, but it's like,
yeah,
you're actually kind of impressed by it. You're like, oh, that looks really good.
Mm-hmm. Which is something that even a big movie from some very capable directors like The Matrix Reloaded didn't do. You know, when Matrix, that's his name, Matrix.
Yeah.
When Neo was fighting
Matrix?
all the agents
Yeah, it looks
in that
fake as
playground,
shit.
it looks horrible, and the transitions between reality and the CG effect are atrocious. Here, they're almost seamless, and even though, like you said, you can tell it's an effect, it doesn't look like a bad effect.
No.
It's just it was so well lit that the effect passes.
Yeah.
And it's so seamlessly put together and tied in with the action and the style of the action that it just I was really surprised by that. I was like, wow, that really held up incredibly well.
I don't think it's ever overused too. They just kind of do it to enhance some of the cooler bits. Like you'll get like some kicks that are like literally impossible to do.
Right.
So they'll CG enhance them, and then I'm telling you, it's like it goes from person to CG to person, and it's really good. You're like, that's really good looking. I can notice it, but I'm impressed. Instead of going, oh man, it looks like shit.
Yeah, that was really surprising. So yeah, Blade 2 is still a rousing success, in my opinion. It used to be my favorite of the series, but upon revision, like I said, I think part 1 will be. But it's very close. They're both very fucking cool and just fun to watch. So I'll keep them eye to eye almost. You know what I'm saying? Where does it stand in your rating?
I think on badassness, it is cooler. But I like I said, I think the first one is better. Not by much though. Maybe like 1 or 2 points.
So we're both eye to eye
on
them being eye to eye. Is what I'm saying. Is what we're saying here. So let's move on to one which I'm sure will not be eye to eye with. Now I was kind of like shocked that your Blu-ray didn't have the option to see the theatrical cut, because there's benefits to seeing both. And I think if you're gonna binge all 3 movies together, or be close to binging them, if you're gonna see them even a few days apart, that the best option is the theatrical cut. It is 9 minutes and some seconds shorter than the director's cut, but the stuff that they add, you got to remember, in a movie, 2 minutes is a lot of stuff. You know, so 9 minutes is plenty of stuff, and there are benefits to seeing the director's cut. but not in a marathon style, and definitely not if you're tired, because what they do re-inject in there at times is extraneous and just frivolous, you know, like that interview at the beginning where they fill you in on what's happened since, you know, the last Blade. Basically, they use that as a method to fill you in. That goes on forever in the director's cut, and you're like, man, this is really taking a long while. The interrogation sequence with Blade, they added so much to that you really...
That is, I honestly, I don't remember. I don't even think I saw the theatrical, because I saw it on DVD. I didn't see it theatrically.
Mm-hmm.
But that is one thing this time around. I thought it was really long at times.
Yes.
And kind of like bordering on boring at times.
Yeah, the pacing is very, very off kilter. Now,
it feels like there is no action for like a long time,
right.
which would be fine if the stuff that was in there was interesting, but it's not very interesting at times.
I think the major problem has to do with, ironically, David S. Goyer. This was the first time he was on a directorial outing. He'd written all three, but this was his director's debut, and I think he did a pretty good job considering it was his first movie.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen first movies that are disastrous in comparison. And this, again, considering this is a big action movie, an effects movie, I think he did pretty decent, actually. Surprisingly decent. However, we can see from his director's filmography that he's never really gone beyond acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, he's a great writer. No matter what people say, they've enjoyed tons of his stuff, but in terms of his director's career, he's never gone beyond just acceptable, and sometimes even mediocre, you know, no matter how good the idea is or the script may be. The other big problem, the elephant in the room, if you will, is a couple of things put together. One, New Line saw the potential in the Blade universe, which they had already built. Mm-hmm. And they wanted this movie to not only be a Blade movie, they wanted it to be a springboard to a Blade universe.
Before
universes were even a thing, yeah. And so there's another thing it broke ground with. But they wanted, kind of. Tried to.
Very hard.
They wanted to introduce, one thing, though, let me preface it with this. One thing that David Goyer had always been good at during these movies was writing in elements of the comic book universe in a very unique way. You know, he'd introduce little things, little nudges to nods and to the fans that knew the Blade universe, and really it was the Tomb of Dracula universe back then. So he had introduced a lot of these elements. Part 3 has the most of this, but it doesn't gel 100% of the time. So what they were trying to do with this movie was springboard into a Night Stalker spin-off that would, you know, coexist side by side with the Blade universe movies. And that meant introducing Hannibal King and Whistler's daughter and the team of Night Stalkers in general. And they even introduced Dracula, which is how Blade even came to be in comics. The caveat to this was that Wesley Snipes, who was a producer and is Blade, was not very happy about this. Understandably so.
Yeah, I kind of get it.
You know, and I get it. You know, had they reined in the amount of exposure of the Night Stalkers and focused on fucking Blade
a little, just even a little bit more.
Yeah, a little bit.
At like certain times in the movie, he's not even important.
Yeah. And then sometimes when he's there, he's just standing there.
Yeah, and it's so jarring because you go from the ultimate at his peak of badassness in part 2, verbally owning fools like it's going out of freaking style, to him just standing there looking sad.
And he owns fools here constantly, but you can tell there's a bitterness under.
Yeah, he's like
he's really wanting to. And it goes without saying, if you know movie history, that this was one of the most troubled sets because of Wesley Snipes. And I don't even blame the guy.
Yeah.
You know, he became an increasingly hard to work with individual. He physically threatened David S. Goyer in the process. They don't talk to each other anymore. And he even was very aggressive against his co-stars, namely Jessica Biel and Ryan Reynolds, giving them horrendous nicknames, refusing. At one point, we had a real Blade on the planet because Wesley Snipes refused to drop the character He all of a sudden was a method actor,
That's
and he refused to drop the character. And you know, Goyer and company have kind of badmouthed him in a manner of speaking by saying he was always in his trailer smoking, and he would only communicate via notes and all that shit. But again, honestly, you got to remember this guy was one of the reasons this series existed.
Yeah, he's
they're
just as, if not more important than Goyer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at this point, the directors are interchangeable. You know what I'm saying? And they've stolen his series away from him. He's pissed. And you can tell in a lot of these
especially because he's so clearly passionate about the character.
Yeah. You can
so
really...
just basically... It feels like they were just ushering him away in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does. And again, like you said, if they had tempered the amount of exposure of the Night Stalkers, it could have worked. They could have shared the spotlight. Alas, because they didn't, he stepped back from the spotlight. And a lot of the scenes, he's just kind of standing there and or in captivity.
There's this one scene, I don't even remember what happens, but Ryan Reynolds says some little joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the joke was supposed to be Blade looks at him annoyed. But you could tell he wants to kill him in real life. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God. Wow.
It's pretty interesting to read about the history of this. If you're interested more in it, check out Patton Oswalt's, who was in this, by the way.
Yeah.
Real briefly, as one of the Night Stalker crew. He has stories about him being Blade on the set, basically. And they do get wild. But in the end, if you keep a reasonable mind, you really have to side with Wesley Snipes, as we said. But that being said, he is in the movie, so that's a thing.
Technically.
Another big issue, I think, in this movie is that David Goyer is not an action director. So a lot of the action that was there and is cool, you could see the chinks in the choreography.
Yeah.
Whereas before... By the way, another bonus fact, the choreography in this was plotted by Wesley Snipes in conjunction with a choreography team. So he's responsible for how Blade fights.
Yeah.
That's his style. You know, so anyway, since Goyer's not an action director, during the action sequences, first of all, the action sequences are not as bombastic and as fresh and alive.
They're so quick, too.
Yeah.
Like... again, going back to Blade 2, you get these long, drawn-out, really impressive-looking choreographed scenes. And this is basically he throws a punch, and that's it.
Yeah, and that's sad. And even when they go longer, you know, they don't seem as seamless. They don't seem as fresh.
Yeah, they're shot kind of whatever, wonky.
And then you begin to see the seams in the choreography at times, which is something you don't want to see in an action movie. So those are big flaws. And... I don't know, what other flaws do you find in this picture? Because I know it varies from person to person. Some people just detest this movie.
I think Dracula was okay, but I think the vampire cronies sucked.
Now let's talk about this. One of the big themes in the Blade movies is they're basically being used to make a social comment about class warfare, about the social hierarchy of people.
Yeah.
If you noticed, all of them have something to do, even with like an allusion to racism and how we treat others better than this class versus, and we can lord ourselves over. Each of these movies,
especially in part 2.
Yeah, especially in part 2. And each of these movies tackles on that in a different way. In part 3, there's a much more tongue-in-cheek approach to it, in the sense that the vampires now toppled after the Vampire Nation, I should say, now toppled and brought to its, you know, crumbling base after the events of part 2, it's really left in the hands of a bunch of inept wannabe vampires, not purebloods, you know, not the old school ones, but a bunch of newbies that are really just more flash than substance. And in that they're supposed to be that way, and the thing is, they don't really quite gel 100% of the time. And you know,
and they're in it so much too.
They are in it quite a bit. Sometimes they work.
Sometimes I'll agree. Sometimes they do work. But there's, for how much they're in it, the amount of times they don't work becomes a problem.
Yes. I think the major issue here was that they should have focused more on Dracula rather than them.
Yeah.
Well, the moment he came in and realized how foolish and wasteful these vampires
are, he should have just freaking killed them.
He should have either killed them or done something to get them in line.
Yeah.
And then they be cronies to him.
Because it brings down Dracula's character to a degree too, because now
Yeah.
he just seems kind of like a wimp.
Yeah, and that's another problem. That's an inherent problem in that he wasn't supposed to seem like a wimp, but he does. He was supposed to seem like he didn't care. He was he was invested in them, and that's
It
clear.
kind of comes across a little
It's
bit.
clear. It's made. He even says it. It's made clear, but you don't feel it.
No.
So that's a problem. But that being said, there are moments where they work. It's just they're in there too much.
But, yeah.
Parker Posey as Danica Talos would have worked. You know, even Triple fucking H would have worked.
I kind of like Triple H, but it's mainly just because it's Triple H.
Yeah. And you know, whatever, they're played as a gag and to make a statement, but
It's
again,
just too
it's
much.
too much exposure.
Too much.
And then we go to Dominic Purcell as the villain. Dracula is a big villain in the comics, the villain, if you will.
Introduced, you're like, oh, this guy's gonna kick ass, and then, oh, he's not that cool.
He's like a vampire apocalypse from X-Men, but they very rarely let him do stuff.
Yeah.
And again, I retread what I just said earlier. He's playing a villain that is not interested in what the Vampire Nation is doing or has become.
Yeah.
He's more interested in Blade, and there's where your movie should have been.
Yeah, and it does get to that eventually.
Yes.
But it's like
But
that
because
middle ground is like
it's behind all this trying to build the Night Stalkers and the too much exposure of the vampire, the goofy vampires. Behind all that, if they would have trimmed all that and focused on Dracula, you know, the tension or lack thereof or fascination between Dracula and Blade, and kept up that kind of Luciferian tempter aside to Dracula, that would have been a great movie. But again, it's burdened by all these issues.
Yeah, especially if Snipes wasn't so down in the movie, I could have seen that being really good.
And I think maybe that was also an element that maybe he just wasn't willing to do those scenes anymore. You know, whatever the case, what we're saying here is that there's good in this movie. It's just, you know, there's too many hurdles that has to get over to for this movie to be 100%. That being said, the theatrical cut is a lot sleeker. You know, it does cut out a lot of that extraneous bullshit.
And maybe that's a problem then. I know we're talking about the details and shit, but I do want to get to my opinion on the movie. Before, I didn't like this movie when I first saw it, and when I've only seen the director's cut. I thoroughly disliked it when I first saw it.
Right.
I like some stuff in it, like I kind of like Triple H. I've always kind of liked Triple H, and I like Dracula. But there was like I remember being like disappointed. And I was so into, I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it another chance. We saw the first two. I'm like, this is going to be cool. And I was kind of disappointed. Yeah. I didn't hate it. I actually liked it this time around. But some of it was like you said, it's like, oh man, this needs to be cut big time.
That's why I wish that's what, remember I kept asking you, I was like, why doesn't it have the theatrical cut? Because that would have been more ideal.
It's too long-winded.
I remember in the theater when I went to go see this, the audience responded really well to it. However, later, upon reading reviews, we all know what happened. You know, fans especially were like, "This is not that good. What is this? Yeah. What is this thing we've gotten here?" And that may have been the starting point for David Goyer being, with evil eyes being cast on him. But because it does feel wrong at times. And anyway. But there are benefits to seeing the director's cut. There are alternate scenes. Some characters get more fleshed out. Unfortunately, some characters you don't want to get fleshed out. Also, and it does have a different ending in terms of who dies in which way. You know, the ending of the theatrical version has Dracula dead in the crater afterwards, Blade nowhere to be seen, and then we just cut to he's still doing his Blade thing. In the director's cut version, we get both of them in the crater, and then we get that weird scene with Blade in the morgue coming back.
Oh yeah.
With the insinuation, implication he may be different, or what, you know, that big.
Oh shit! Turn that off.
Just gonna go ahead and dismiss this. I don't know how. There we go. Professionalism, folks. Yeah. But anyway, and then also the director's cut. On the DVD, I don't know if it's on your Blu-ray, had an extra ending where you could see the Night Stalker movie being set up with Whistler and Hannibal King at a bar, and they encounter werewolves. So that was a bonus there too. But yeah, in the end, this movie, though having all the tools to be a good movie, ultimately ends up being kind of a half okay movie.
Yeah.
Where you could see where it could have been great, but there was too much in its way to be great. But let's talk about the actors. Anybody you didn't like? I know a lot of the people had points of contention, bone to pick with Jessica Biel. They made a big deal about her listening to music during her fighting. I thought she was fine. Yes, there's tons of silly stuff in the movie. And you're gonna pick her putting earbuds into her, whatever. It didn't bother me. A lot of people responded negatively to Ryan Reynolds, which if you want to see Ryan Reynolds be Deadpool before he's Deadpool, that's basically what he's playing here, a jackass. He's being giant Ryan Reynolds. Then you're either going to jibe with that or you're not. It depends on your mood. I remember the response to his one-liners and all that stuff being extremely well received in the theater when I saw it. But it didn't hit that tone with me this time. At times, it just depends. But I do like Dominic Purcell as Dracula. I wish he had more to do in this because he's cool. I liked him as Dracula, man. And Blade, well, shit, he's kind of phoning that bastard in.
Is he there?
Boo!
I do want to say that I really didn't like the two new characters when I first saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mind Ryan Reynolds this time around. I didn't love him, but he was okay.
Yeah.
And they do kind of establish a reason for him to be there. So you're like, okay, I think he's the best one of the Night Stalkers.
Yeah.
Because what's her face doesn't really do anything. I don't dislike her. I'm okay with her because she doesn't really do anything.
I think the big problem with her is that she was supposed to be like the heart of the Night Stalkers.
Yeah, but she
comes as a blank slate.
Yeah.
And we have to depend on Blade telling us her emotions.
Yeah.
For us to, I mean, we understand. It's just it's not working 100% of the time.
She's just kind of there.
But she's fine. Like she is fine. Like woo that ass. But whatever. I get why people would criticize her. And then she's not great.
The rest of the team is like kind of lame.
Ultimately they're pointless. Again, too many fucking pokers in the fire in this fucking movie, so nothing really gels 100%. But the effects are pretty good, damn good. The action, it's the worst in the series, but it's okay. It communicates what it needs to. Not enough of it, especially once the series gets you used to tons of action on top of tons of story. Here we get a lopsided story and spurts of mini action, so it's like, all right, well, that's the thing I'm seeing.
It's so uneven.
What I do like about this movie is
the dog.
I don't, but okay. I like that it does still continue its thematic course in terms of the movie. It does still flesh out the universe. I do like that, and Blade, when he is cool, rare though it may be in this film. And I would have liked to see the Night Stalkers work, but they ultimately didn't. And of course, I like Dracula, and some of the ideas in it are neat, but ultimately, it falls more on the wayside. Any final thoughts?
It's a pretty disappointing movie. I thought it's not bad. I don't think it's horrible, which is what I used to think.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually kind of the reason why I wanted to rewatch the movies, because I remember disliking the third one so much, and I was like, I kind of want to give it another chance, and so I was really open to it, which is maybe why I didn't hate it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which kind of falls in line with what I'm saying. Like it really depends on your mood.
Yeah.
So
like I said, there was times where I was like, this is boring, dude, bordering on boring.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, those moments don't last too long, but there's a lot of them in there.
Yeah, I agree.
It's definitely the worst one, but I don't think it's garbage.
Okay.
It's okay.
So let's give our final ratings to all three. Give us, again, this is in context of their own fucking movies, not like we're not comparing this to Casablanca, which, by the way, I've never been able to see straight through once, always in chunks. But anyway,
all right.
I'm not saying that the movie's fault. I'm just saying
Casablanca is a solid one.
Yeah, apparently. But anyway, let's rate this. Part 1, what do you rate it on a scale 1 to 10?
Part 1's a 9.5 for me. I think it's the best one.
I'm going to give part 1 a solid old 8.5. I'm only taking points off because those shoddy effects, little skeletons.
Yeah, little skeletons are pretty
Pretty
shitty.
bad, but it is a great fucking movie. And
I
it's
do wish.
a blast.
I do wish. At the same time, I don't, because we got 2 and 2 kicks ass. But it would have been neat if they had kept that Morbius thing in there.
Yeah.
But unfortunately,
Alas.
yeah.
Now Jared Leto. But anyway,
He's gonna have his little jacket.
let's move on to part. He's really happy about it. In fact, insert that picture right here. That's great. But anyway, he's really happy.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Now I'm gonna have to export for 3 hours for that picture.
it's worth it.
It kind of is. I'm not even mad about it.
Let's go to part 2. Rating 1 to 10. Give it to me.
Two is really cool. It went down in my coolness scale from last time, but that's just because I was so impressed with 1. It still kicks ass, and like I said, it's really impressive in many ways. And of course, it was kind of the start of our boy Guillermo's big budget flicks. So it has to be a little bit lower, so I'll give it a 9.
I'm going to give, now this is going to sound contrary to what I said, but I'm going to give this an 8.7, and that's because the production value is remarkably higher, so we don't have cartoon skeletons in it. And I do, you know this, I'm a huge fan of Frankenstein and iterations of that story, and like I said, that's basically what we get with our bad guy. So I love that.
It's kind of funny. He combined Frankenstein with vampires, and he made them look like freaking Nosferatus.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, he has a thing for
Nosferatu
bald
is a
vamps.
breed. Yeah, he does, actually. But anyway, bald vamps aside, that's my score for that one. Let's go to the third one. The contentious third one. The controversial third one. What is your final rating on that little sucker right there? Hit me with it.
It's hard because, like I said, I don't hate it, but I thoroughly dislike it. So
Let me start you off on that one.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a 4.5. And that sounds horrible, but...
that's actually what I was going to...
But that's so much... There's so much against it
Yeah.
that, you know, it's hard to give it more than that, no matter how much you want to. And that's the thing. I want this movie to be cool. And so the good elements do stick out, and I can see a better director having crafted this into something cool and having probably forced fucking Wesley Snipes to do his job, you know, which you can do in Hollywood, even if it's a big, tough guy like Snipes, you could have done. But unfortunately, we didn't get that director. We got somebody that was a novice and hasn't improved since then, really, as a director. So because of that, no matter what good threads there are in here, good intentions there are, you know, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
I just heard that
the
Randy
case.
Travis song.
Yeah.
Randy Travis is Blade in the next movie, by the way.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
He's just drunk all
He's
the time.
just sucking on booze instead of blood.
I'll give
it a 4.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty fair.
Wow.
And again, that's without us hating it. It's just, you got to be fair.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's our thoughts on Blade. What'd you think of the series? Let us know what you think. This is, just repeated myself there, but let's call it a day and say hit like, share, and subscribe anyway. I'm Goontik. I'm not Goontik. He's Goontik. I'm Ahab. And we're out.
Bass music, stupid sounds, all kinds of shit for you. Anything goes inside the night, from a couple corpulent Jews. Bass music, stupid sounds, all kinds of shit for you.